let's define a function, call it getNumber. Here I'm going to define a loop. So for bar I equals 0, as long as I is less than 10, we're going to increment I with ++, and then we console.log of I. Pretty simple, right? Let's call this function. So the changes back in the browser. So here we see the numbers, pretty straightforward. However, there's a problem with the bar keyword in JavaScript. In most programming languages, when you declare a variable, that variable should only be accessible in the block of which it is defined. This is what we call scope, right? So in this case, I should only be accessible inside of this for block. However, I can come here and log I on the console. You'll see that I is still accessible in here. So go to the console. Look, we got I displayed here. We got this last iteration, I equals 10. And because 10 is not less than 10, so we exit this loop. So this is what I want to take away. When I declare a variable with the bar keyword, that variable is accessible inside of this function in which it's defined. And this is one of those weird things in JavaScript that's different from other programming languages. So in ECMAScript 6 or ES6, which is a version of JavaScript introduced in the year 2015, we got a new keyword for declaring variables, and that is let. So let came to solve this problem. So when you declare a variable with the let keyword, that variable is only accessible inside of that block. Now let's see the results. So the changes, go to the browser. Now we get this error on the console. So this is what I want to take away. Variable with the bar keyword are scoped to the function, whereas variable declared with the let keyword are scoped in the block in which they are defined. Now we also have another new keyword in S6, and that is const. We use const to define constants. I'll show you that in a second. But similar to let, variable defined with the const are also block scoped, so they are only accessible inside of the block which they are defined. So let me show you the difference between let and const. So I'm going to delete all of this code here. Let's define a variable, set it to 10. Now, if you reassign this with the 20 and set the changes back in the browser and see there's an error. So when I see a variable with a const keyword, that variable cannot be reassigned. That's why we refer to that as a constant. So technically it's not a variable because it cannot change, it's a constant. So let's quickly wrap up. Throw away the bar keyword and prefer to use const over let. We use let only when we wanted to reassign a variable. That's all about the const and let in ES6. One of my favorite features in modern JavaScript is arrow function. So let's define a constant called square and set it to a function that takes a number and simply return number times number. This is the old way of JavaScript. So starting for ECMAScript, we have a cleaner way to write the same code. So let me duplicate this so you can see both versions side by side. To convert this function to an arrow function, we get rid of function keyword and put a fat arrow between the parameters and the body of the function. Now, if you have only a single parameter, you can exclude this parenthesis. Also, if you have 0 parameter, you have an empty parenthesis. So this is a function that takes no parameters. Okay, now let's revert this back. We have a single parameter number. If the body of this function includes only a single line and return a value, we can make this code even shorter. You can get rid of return keyword as well as curly braces. And this is the end result. Now we have a single parameter, so we can get rid of parentheses. So now the code we have on line 5 is exactly equivalent to what we have at the top. You can see the syntax is cleaner and more compact, and you can read it like number goes to number times number. So you can call this square function like this and log the result on the console. Let's remove this, otherwise we get an error because we have declared a square constant twice. So save the changes, go to the browser, we get 36 on the console. Now let me show you why this arrow function is really useful. Let's imagine we have an array of users. So each user has an ID and a property called isActive, which is set to true or false. Now I'm going to add a couple more here. So we have 4 users with their ID and isActive property, which is boolean true or false. So for the ID 2 and 4, I'm going to set this isActive to false. Now let's imagine we need to get the users who is active. So we get the users array, apply a filter method. The argument we pass here is a predicate function, a function that takes an user object and returns true or false. So when you call the filter method, this method iterates over this array. The job of this predicate is to determine if that user object should be returned from the filter method. So here we can return user that is active. So we can get this final list and call it to active users. Okay. Now here we have a simple function, and this is perfect opportunity for us to use an arrow function and make this code cleaner and more readable. So I'm gonna duplicate this line so we can compare them side by side. So as I told you before, to convert to an arrow function, we get rid of function keyword, delete, put a fat arrow between the parameter and the body, as well as we call it braces, and we have a single line here. We're simply returning a value, so we can get rid of return keyword, as well as semicolon here. Now we have a single parameter, so we can get rid of parentheses. So this is the end result. You can see this is more cleaner and easier to read. So we can simply visualize that filter users where user is active. There is less noise in this code. One of the modern JavaScript feature we use quite a lot in our project is the spread operator. Let's say we have two array as a variable. So in the first variable, in the box 1, we have an array with the item 1, 2. And in the second box, we have an array with the item 3, 4. So if you wanted to combine them as an old way of JavaScript, you'll do something like this. You'll combine two boxes with the concate method, like box1.concate, and in this parentheses, we just pass the second box. This is the old way of JavaScript. Now, in modern JavaScript feature, from ES6, we can rewrite this code like this. Const combine box, we create a new array and then spread this first array, and that spread means we take all the item in the first box and then put it into new array. Similarly, we spread the second array. You see that the spread operator is represented using 3 dots. Now you'd say there is no optimization technique in terms of the length of this code in between 2 lines. So what is an improvement? Well, what if we wanted to add an element somewhere in the middle? We can simply come here and add any elements right in the middle without any complexity. But with the concate method, if you wanted to get the same result, you'll end up a lot of code and extra complexity. Also, we can add more items in this array, so we can visually see what the end results will look like. Let me show you. Let's comment out this concate method and constant log combine box and run the JavaScript file. See, we get the item of first and second box in a new array, as well as extra item that we added in this combined array. So basically, when I add a spread operator in an array, we just get each individual item in that array. The good news is, with the spread operator, we can easily clone an array. Let's see that. I'm going to delete this line. Let's say we want to clone the first box. So we write const as a variable, clone box1, and in this variable, we take a new array and simply spread the first box, like this. Now let's see the results. So console.log and clone box1, save the changes, run this JavaScript file, and here's a clone. Another good news is, we can also spread the object just like array. So now I'm gonna rewrite this code using an object instead of array. So let's define a const text1 in an object with the property first name called Shahan and another object with the property last name Ahmed. Okay. So we want to combine these two objects into a single object. We declare another const variable called combined and we set into a new object. Now in this new object, we want to get all the property in the first variable. Then we also spread our second variable like this. And we can optionally add another properties. Let's say we have property called job, software development. So if we log this combined object, we'll get this final object with these 3 properties. Similarly, we can apply spread operator to clone an object like this. So we simply take this first name and clone its object into a new object. Then we log this console and see, this is the same results. So this is the benefits of using the spread operator. We can simply clone any array or any object, and you'll see this spread operator in almost all modern JavaScript projects.